9 years ago, I died in a flash flood. Today, my face was on Forbes, hailed as the ghost of Silicon Valley, a title that became terrifyingly literal when my phone buzzed and the caller ID simply read, Dad. The champagne flute was cold against my palm, a stark contrast to the warmth spreading through my chest. From my penthouse apartment on the 87th floor, the city below looked like a circuit board of sprawling light, a universe I had conquered. My face was on the cover of Forbes magazine, sitting on the polished mahogany desk beside me. Alex Sterling, the ghost of Silicon Valley, redesigns our future, the headline read. I had to laugh at the irony. Ghost. They had no idea. 9 years. 9 years of grinding, coding until my fingers were numb, sleeping on floors and living on instant noodles and pure, unadulterated spite. 9 years since I, Leo Vance, had died in a flash flood in the Sierra Nevadas. My phone, a sleek, custom-built device that was another one of my company's quiet innovations, buzzed on the desk. I glanced at it, expecting another congratulatory message from an investor or a ping from my PR team. But the name on the screen made the champagne in my stomach turn to acid. It was a name I hadn't seen in nearly a decade, a name connected to a life I had buried under a mountain of code and a new identity. Dad. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic prisoner trying to escape. How? How did he get this number? My number was more heavily guarded than a state secret. I had spent a fortune on digital security, on creating a firewall between Alex Sterling and the ghost of Leo Vance. For 9 years, the silence had been absolute. I had checked, of course. In the early years, I'd used library computers and VPNs, my hands shaking as I searched my own name. I saw the news reports. Young hiker, Leo Vance, presumed dead after tragic accident. I saw the online memorial page my sister set up. I saw the picture of my family at the memorial service, my father looking stoic and grim, my mother weeping into a handkerchief. They had mourned. They had moved on. They had accepted that the disappointing, dreamy-eyed son who cared more about computer nonsense than the family's respectable construction business was gone forever. And I had let them. It was the kindest thing I could do for myself. The day I disappeared wasn't an accident, not really. The flash flood was real, a terrifying, churning beast of mud and water that had ripped my tent from its moorings and sent my pack tumbling into the abyss. I had survived by clinging to a tree root for 6 hours, cold and battered, but alive. When I finally dragged myself onto solid ground, bruised and hypothermic, a realization washed over me with more force than the floodwaters. This was my chance. I could just walk away. I could leave behind the constant disappointment in my father's eyes, the way he called my passion for coding, playing with toys. I could escape the suffocating weight of his expectations, the life he had mapped out for me, a loveless marriage to a business partner's daughter, a corner office in his company, a slow, agonizing death of the soul. The final argument we'd had before I left for that hiking trip echoed in my memory. I'd just secured a small seed investment for my first app idea. I was ecstatic, practically vibrating with hope. I showed him the paperwork, the business plan. He'd looked at it with utter contempt. $1,000, he'd scoffed, tossing the papers onto the kitchen table. That's what you're throwing your life away for? $1,000 and a pipe dream? Your brother is closing a $500,000 deal on the new subdivision, and you're playing games on your computer like a child. The words that followed were the final nail in the coffin of Leo Vance. You're not a builder, you're a burden. You're a disappointment, and frankly, I'm tired of looking at you. So I left. I walked out of that flood-ravaged forest with nothing but the clothes on my back and a burning desire to prove him wrong, not to him, but to myself. I hitchhiked to a city where no one knew me, got a fake ID, and started washing dishes. Every spare dollar, every waking moment went into building my dream. Leo Vance was dead, and in his place, Alex Sterling was born from mud, fury, and ambition. And Alex Sterling had finally, spectacularly, succeeded. Forbes. The cover of Forbes. The one magazine my father read religiously, the ultimate symbol of success in his world. I knew the article would be the one thing that could pierce the veil. His photo was there. Older, leaner, with a beard and a few scars. But the eyes were the same. He must have seen it. My thumb hovered over the notification, my whole body trembling. A part of me wanted to hurl the phone against the floor-to-ceiling windows, to watch it shatter into a million pieces, just like my carefully constructed piece. Another, darker part of me was screaming with a twisted sense of victory. See? You see me now? I wasn't a disappointment after all. For 9 years, they thought I was a tragic memory, a ghost. Now I was a ghost worth $3 billion. With a deep, shuddering breath, I tapped the screen. The message opened, a simple line of black text on a white background. It wasn't, "Is this you?" or "Are you alive?" It was something so much worse, so much more like him. It was a statement of ownership, a claim laid on a life he had forsaken. "I always knew you had it in you, son. We need to talk. Your mother is sick. Your mother is sick." The words hung in the airless silence of my penthouse, heavier than stone. The champagne flute slipped from my numb fingers, not shattering but landing with a dull thud on the plush Persian rug. A dark, bubbling stain spread across the cream-colored wool, a perfect metaphor for how that single message was poisoning my perfectly curated world. My first instinct was a tidal wave of pure, unadulterated rage. The gall, the absolute monumental audacity of the man. 9 years of silence. Not a single attempt to find me, not a private investigator, not a whisper. They held a memorial. They buried an empty casket. They wrote me off. And now, the moment my net worth is splashed across a magazine cover, he comes crawling back with the oldest trick in the book. "I always knew you had it in you, son." The lie was so bald-faced it was almost impressive. He'd known nothing of the sort. He'd seen a dreamer, a failure, a stain on the Vance family name, a name built on concrete and steel, not code and algorithms. He had looked at my passion and seen weakness. Now he looked at my balance sheet and saw strength. He didn't see a son. He saw a solution, a walking, talking ATM. But then, my mother. My mind, usually a clean, efficient processor of logic and data, fractured. Memories I had suppressed for years bled through the cracks. Her sneaking me cookies after Dad had sent me to my room without dinner for spending too much time on the computer. Her quietly slipping me a $20 bill, whispering, "For your projects," with a look that was a mixture of love and weary resignation. She was the buffer, the soft place to land, but she was never a shield. She never stood up to him. Never once did she say, "Robert, that's enough. Leave the boy alone." Her love was passive, a quiet apology for his cruelty, and I resented her for it, almost as much as I loved her for it. Was she really sick? Or was this just the opening salvo in a master manipulator's campaign? A cold knot of dread and suspicion tightened in my gut. I wouldn't be played. Leo Vance might have been a boy who could be guilted and shamed, but Alex Sterling was a man who dealt in data and verification. I stalked out of the living room, leaving the spilled champagne, and entered the heart of my home and my empire, my office. It was less an office and more a command center. A curved wall of monitors glowed with lines of code, market data, and satellite imagery. I sat in the leather chair, the cool material a comfort against my suddenly feverish skin, and my fingers flew across the keyboard. It was time to find the truth. The Vance family was not particularly tech-savvy, a fact I now use to my advantage. I started with my sister, Sarah. Her social media profiles were locked down, set to private. A minor inconvenience, a few keystrokes, a bypassed security protocol, and I was in. Her entire life for the past 9 years unfolded before me on the screen. There was my brother, Mark, getting married, Pictures of him grinning, my father's arm slung around his shoulder, the perfect heir. There were nieces and nephews I'd never met, their faces beaming in birthday photos and Christmas sweaters. Each image was a punch to the gut, a ghost of a life I might have had. I felt a pang of loss so sharp it stole my breath, but I shoved it down. I wasn't here for nostalgia. I was here for intel. I scrolled, my eyes scanning captions and comments, vague posts about difficult times and praying for strength. Then, 6 months ago, a photo of my mother. She looked fragile, thinner than I remembered, with dark circles under her eyes that no filter could hide. She was smiling, but it didn't reach her eyes. The caption read, "My warrior mom fighting the good fight. We love you so much." The comments were a flood of prayer hand emojis and well wishes. I cross-referenced the date with local hospital visitor logs, public insurance filings, the digital breadcrumbs people leave without even realizing it. The picture was clear: ovarian cancer, stage 3. A long, expensive, brutal fight. The rage I felt earlier was replaced by a cold, hollow ache. It was real. She was really sick. The thought of her suffering, of her facing that fight while thinking her youngest son was dead, was unbearable. My father was a bastard, but he had used a real bullet. The guilt was immense, a physical weight pressing down on my chest. For a moment, I almost reached for the phone to reply, to say, "What? I'm here? I'm alive? I can help?" But something stopped me, a flicker of doubt. This was my father. Nothing was ever that simple. Alex Sterling, the CEO, took over from Leo Vance, the son. I kept digging. If they were dealing with massive medical bills, there would be a financial trail. I shifted my search from personal lives to corporate filings, Vance Construction, my father's pride and joy, and what I found made my blood run cold. It was a disaster. A string of failed bids, a major lawsuit from a collapsed structure, and finally, the smoking gun, a bankruptcy filing from 2 months ago. They were broke, utterly, completely broke. The company that had been my father's monument to his own success, the thing he valued more than his own son, was a pile of rubble. They couldn't afford her treatment. The GoFundMe page Sarah had set up confirmed it. They were begging for donations, trying to raise a fraction of what they needed for the experimental therapy her doctors were recommending. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The Forbes article wasn't a surprise, it was a godsend. My father wasn't just reaching out, he was launching a rescue mission for his own sinking ship, using my dying mother as the figurehead. My heart felt like a block of ice. I scrolled through the GoFundMe page, the desperate pleas, the small donations from friends and neighbors, and then I saw it. A comment posted 3 weeks before my Forbes cover even hit the newsstands. It was from a name I recognized, one of my father's old drinking buddies. The comment was addressed to my sister. "Heard about your mom, Sarah. So sorry. Let me know if your dad ever finds that long-lost lottery ticket he was talking about." A lottery ticket. A cold dread washed over me as I understood. He hadn't just stumbled upon the article. He must have been looking for years. Not for his son, but for his investment. He had been tracking the tech world, waiting for the computer nonsense of his disappointing son to finally pay out. He hadn't texted me because he saw his son alive. He'd texted me because his lottery ticket had just been called. The phrase "long-lost lottery ticket" echoed in the digital silence of my office. It was a perfect, brutal encapsulation of my father's entire worldview. People, his own children, weren't beings to be loved and nurtured. They were assets to be managed, investments that were expected to yield a return. My brother Mark was a blue-chip stock, reliable and steady. I was the volatile penny stock he'd written off, only to discover it had become a titan of the industry. He wasn't mourning a lost son. He was furious about a missed opportunity. He hadn't been searching for Leo Vance. He'd been hunting for Alex Sterling. The coldness in my chest solidified, turning into something hard and sharp. The guilt I'd felt moments before evaporated, replaced by a clarity so absolute it was almost serene. I knew exactly what I was dealing with. This wasn't a family reunion. It was a hostile takeover bid. My father wanted to acquire my success, my wealth, and fold it back into the failing Vance empire, using my mother's illness as his leverage. He thought that after 9 years, I was still the same soft-hearted boy he'd browbeaten into submission. He had no idea who he was dealing with. He had created a ghost, and that ghost had learned to haunt the machine. My fingers moved with renewed purpose. I wasn't just investigating anymore. I was preparing for war. I needed to know everything. I bypassed the firewalls of the county courthouse servers, pulling up the full bankruptcy filings for Vance Construction. It was worse than I thought. The debts were astronomical. He'd taken out second and third mortgages on their home, the house I grew up in. He'd leveraged every asset to the hilt, gambling on one last big government contract that had fallen through. The lawsuit wasn't just a financial drain, it was a reputational catastrophe. Photos of the collapsed parking garage were all over the local news archives. Shoddy materials, cut corners. My father's signature cost-saving measures had finally, literally, come crashing down. He hadn't just lost his business, he had disgraced his own name. The irony was so thick I could taste it. The man who valued his reputation above all else had torched it himself. Then, I turned my attention to my mother's medical situation. I found her oncologist, a Dr. Eris Thorne at St. Jude's Medical Center. Getting into a hospital's secure network is child's play for someone who designs security architecture for a living. Within minutes, I had her complete medical file open on my screen. Stage 3, ovarian carcinoma. The prognosis was grim but not hopeless. The experimental immunotherapy trial they were trying to fund was her best chance. It was also prohibitively expensive, with no guarantee of insurance coverage. The cost was listed, $1.2 million for the first year of treatment. To me, that was a rounding error, the cost of a new server farm. To them, it was an impossible mountain. And there, in the digital paperwork, was the proof I needed. My father, Robert Vance, was listed as holding her medical power of attorney. He was in control. Any financial aid, any decisions about her treatment, it would all go through him. He had positioned himself as the gatekeeper. He wasn't just asking for money for her care. He was asking for control of the funds. He would be the hero who swooped in and saved his dying wife, using his long-lost son's fortune. He would pay her bills, yes, but what about the rest? The millions, the billions left over? It would be absorbed, laundered through a new construction company, a fresh start built on the foundations of my life's work. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the monitors illuminating a cold smile on my face. He had laid his trap perfectly. He'd presented me with an impossible choice: let my mother suffer or hand my father the keys to my kingdom. He was counting on my love for her to blind me, to make me pliable. It was a masterful move, I had to admit. But he'd made one critical miscalculation. He assumed that the son he had discarded was the same man who would return. He thought he was playing chess with a pawn, when he was, in fact, facing a grandmaster who had designed the board itself. I picked up my phone. His message was still there, a digital beacon of his greed. I always knew you had it in you, son. We need to talk. Your mother is sick. I began to type my reply. Every word was carefully chosen, a weaponized piece of code designed to bypass his ego and strike directly at his control. I couldn't reveal how much I knew, not yet. I had to play his game, but on my terms. I had to get close, to get past him and directly to my mother. My message was short, devoid of emotion, a simple business transaction. I saw the Forbes article. I imagine you did too. Send me her medical file and the total cost of treatment. My lawyers will handle the rest. I hit send. The trap was now set. I was offering him the bait he craved, the money, but I was seizing control of the narrative, framing it as a legal, impersonal transaction. I was removing the son from the equation and replacing him with a benefactor. Let him think he was winning. The true battle hadn't even begun. 2 minutes later, my phone buzzed. His reply was instantaneous. "Lawyers. Leo, this is a family matter. Your mother wants to see you." My fingers froze over the screen. He was parrying, refusing to cede ground, pulling the emotional card again. "Your mother wants to see you." It was a lie, wasn't it? A calculated manipulation? Did she even know I was alive? He wouldn't have told her. The shot could be dangerous in her condition. He was using her as a shield, a hostage. My anger flared, hot and sharp. I was about to type a scathing reply to call his bluff when a second message came through from his number. But this one wasn't from him. The tone was completely different. It was frantic, panicked, and filled with typos. "Leo, don't listen to him. He took my phone. Please, you have to come home. She's asking for you. She's been asking for you for years. Please, Leo, I don't know what to do." It was from my sister, Sarah. And in that single terrified message, the entire game changed. Sarah's message was a grenade tossed into my perfectly calculated war room. "She's been asking for you for years." The words dismantled my defenses, piece by piece. All my logic, all my strategic planning, all the cold, hard data I had gathered, it all faltered in the face of that one desperate plea. I had built my new life on the assumption that they had all moved on, that Leo Vance was a ghost only to me. But if my mother had been asking for me, if she had never truly believed I was gone, then the last 9 years of my silence weren't a kindness. They were a cruelty. The rage I felt towards my father was suddenly overshadowed by a wave of gut-wrenching shame. While I was building an empire fueled by spite, my mother was lying in bed, sick and heartbroken, wondering where her son was. My father had used her as a pawn, but I had abandoned the board entirely. Who was worse? The thought was a physical blow. The air in my climate-controlled penthouse suddenly felt thin, suffocating. I stood up and paced, my bare feet sinking into the rug where the champagne had spilled, the cold, damp spot a grounding sensation. I had to recalibrate. My father was still the primary threat, a predator circling a kill. But now there was a new variable, my sister. She was my way in. She had reached out, broken ranks. It meant she was either desperate or brave or both. It also meant she was at risk. My father controlling her phone, even for a moment, was a clear sign of his escalating tyranny. He was losing his grip on his company, his finances, and his health, so he was tightening his grip on his family. I sat back down, my mind racing. I couldn't just wire the money. If I did, my father would control it, dole it out, and take the credit. He'd use it to trap my mother and sister further, making them financially dependent on his miraculous solution. And I couldn't just show up on their doorstep. He would be waiting, ready to play the part of the forgiving patriarch, welcoming his prodigal son home in front of my sick mother, creating a scene where I would be forced to play along or look like a monster. No. I had to neutralize my father first. I had to strip him of his power before I ever set foot in that house again. My fingers returned to the keyboard, but this time, my target wasn't just information. It was action. I started with a simple, untraceable wire transfer, not to my father, not to the GoFundMe, but to a newly created trust account. I named Dr. Eris Thorne, my mother's oncologist, as the sole trustee, with a single beneficiary, my mother, Elena Vance. I funded it with $5 million. It was an obscene amount of money, far more than needed for her treatment, but it was a statement. The money came with a single anonymous directive for the doctor. Provide Elena Vance with the absolute best care possible, bar none, all expenses covered, anonymously. Step 1 was complete. My mother's care was now secured, completely outside of my father's control. He could no longer hold her health hostage. When the hospital's financial department contacted him to say an anonymous donor had covered everything, his primary leverage would vanish. He would be left with nothing but his empty threats and his ruined business. Next, I turned my attention to my sister. I needed to establish a secure line of communication. I sent a text back to my father's number, knowing Sarah would likely see it. It was a simple, innocuous question designed to sound like it was for my father. "What hospital is she in? I'll have my people contact their billing department." It was corporate, cold, and played right into the role I had established. But embedded in the message's metadata was a tiny encrypted data packet. If she opened the message on her own smartphone, it would install a secure, untraceable communication app, appearing on her phone as a harmless-looking calculator icon. It was a digital lifeline, a secret door only she could open. I leaned back, watching the lines of code on my screen, waiting. The minutes stretched into an eternity. My plan was in motion, but it was delicate. It depended on Sarah's courage and my father's arrogance. I was betting that he wouldn't think to check his daughter's phone for military-grade spyware, disguised as a calculator. Finally, a notification popped up on my private monitor. Secure connection established. Sarah had opened the door. My fingers flew across the secure chat interface. "Me. Sarah, this is Leo. Is this line secure? Can he see this?" The reply was almost instant, her typing frantic. Sarah. "OMG, Leo, is it really you? I can't believe it. No, he can't see this. What is this thing? He's downstairs raging about your text." Relief washed over me. She was safe and she was talking. Me. Good. Don't tell him you're talking to me. Don't tell anyone. I need you to be strong. I'm handling Mom's medical bills. All of them. They're paid. An anonymous donor. Sarah. What? How? Leo, he's telling everyone you're coming home that you're going to save the family business. The audacity. He was already spinning the narrative, positioning himself as the savior who had brought his billionaire son back into the fold. Me. The business is gone, Sarah. I saw the bankruptcy. I'm not saving it, I'm saving Mom, that's all. Now tell me, how is she really? The truth. The ... of her typing appeared and disappeared several times. Finally, a wall of text came through. Sarah. She's weak. The first round of chemo was so hard on her, but her spirit. Leo, she talks about you all the time. She never believed you were dead. She has this picture of you from when you were 10, the one with the science fair ribbon. She keeps it by her bed. She tells the nurses her brilliant son is out there changing the world, and he'll come home when he's ready. Dad told her you died. He had a funeral. She never went. She refused. Each word was a knife twisting in my gut. She had known. She had kept faith. My father hadn't just lied to the world. He had tried to enforce that lie on his own grieving wife. The monster I thought I knew had dimensions of cruelty I couldn't have imagined. Me, Sarah. I'm coming home. Not for him, for her. But I need to do this my way. Can you help me? Sarah. Anything, Leo. What do you need? Me. I need you to get him out of the house tomorrow. Tell him I've agreed to a meeting, but only with him. A neutral location, a diner halfway between the city and your town. Tell him I'll be there at noon. He'll go. His ego won't let him refuse a chance to think he's reeling me in. Sarah. And you'll be there? Me. No. I'll be at the house. With Mom. There was a long pause. I could almost feel her fear through the screen. She would be lying directly to our father, an act of rebellion I couldn't have fathomed from the timid sister I remembered. Sarah, he'll be furious when he finds out. Me, I know, but by the time he gets back, everything will have changed, trust me. Sarah, okay, I'll do it. Leo, I've missed you so much. Me, I've missed you too, Sarah. Stay strong. I'll see you tomorrow. I closed the connection, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The plan was audacious, dangerous, and hinged entirely on a lie. For 9 years, I had lived as a ghost. Tomorrow, I would finally come home to haunt the man who had tried to bury me. My jet was fueled and waiting. I packed a single bag, not with clothes, but with a series of hard drives and a custom laptop. I wasn't just going to see my mother, I was going to perform an exorcism. As I walked out of my penthouse, leaving the Forbes magazine and the life of Alex Sterling behind, my phone buzzed one last time. It was a secure message from a private investigator I kept on retainer. I'd tasked him with one last job, digging into the specifics of the parking garage collapse. The message contained a single scanned document, a sworn affidavit from a disgruntled former foreman of Vance Construction. I read the first line, and my blood turned to ice. It wasn't just about shoddy materials, it was about a deliberate criminal cover-up. And the final sentence of the affidavit made me stop dead in the hallway, the bag slipping from my hand. Robert Vance knew about the structural instabilities a week before the collapse. He didn't just cut corners, he falsified the inspection reports himself. There was a homeless man who had been sleeping in the garage for shelter. His body was found in the rubble 3 days later. Manslaughter. The word slammed into my consciousness with the force of a physical blow. My father wasn't just a bankrupt, emotionally abusive narcissist. He was a criminal. He had knowingly let a man die to save a few dollars and protect his own crumbling reputation. The affidavit in my hand felt radioactive, a testament to a depth of depravity I hadn't thought possible. This changed everything. My plan to simply neutralize him, to financially and emotionally sideline him, suddenly felt naive, inadequate. This wasn't a family drama anymore. It was a matter of justice. The homeless man, John Doe, now had a name in my mind, a victim, a ghost who deserved a voice. My father hadn't just buried a son, he'd buried a body. The anger that had been simmering in me for years erupted into a white-hot, focused rage. I picked up my bag, my resolve hardening into something cold and unbreakable. Seeing my mother was still the mission, but the objective had expanded. I wasn't just going home to reclaim my life, I was going to dismantle his. The flight in my private jet was a blur of encrypted calls and frantic work. I contacted my legal team, a pack of the most ruthless corporate lawyers in the country. I forwarded them the affidavit. Their response was swift and clinical. The statute of limitations on involuntary manslaughter hadn't expired, and the falsified inspection reports constituted felony fraud. With this evidence, my father wasn't just facing financial ruin, he was facing prison. A long, long time in a cage made of the same concrete and steel he worshipped. I landed at a private airfield an hour outside my hometown, under the cover of darkness. A nondescript rental car was waiting. As I drove through the familiar yet alien landscape, memories ambushed me at every turn. The old movie theater where I'd had my first kiss, the park where my brother broke his arm falling out of a tree. It felt like watching a film of someone else's life. This town, this whole world belonged to Leo Vance. I was Alex Sterling, an intruder, a ghost in the machine of my own past. I spent the night in a sterile motel room, my laptop open, my command center reestablished. I monitored everything. I saw Sarah's text to my father, a masterpiece of feigned reluctance. Leo's lawyers said he'll meet you. Noon, Miller's Diner off the interstate. He said to come alone. I saw my father's triumphant reply. About time he saw reason. Tell your mother I have good news. The arrogance was sickening. He was walking into his own demise with a swagger. The next morning, I watched his car's GPS signal, a little tracker I'd had activated through the vehicle's onboard system, as it pulled out of the driveway right at 11 a.m. He was giving himself plenty of time, an hour's drive for a meeting that would never happen. The moment his car was a mile down the road, I sent Sarah a single message on our secure app. He's gone. I'm 5 minutes out. Pulling onto my childhood street was the most surreal moment of my life. The house looked smaller, sadder. The lawn was overgrown, and the paint was peeling from the trim. the telltale signs of neglect that my fastidious father would never have tolerated in his prime. This was a house in mourning, a monument to decay. I parked a block away and walked, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I felt like a burglar, a trespasser in my own history. Sarah opened the door before I could even knock. The years had changed her. The carefree girl I remembered was gone, replaced by a woman with worry etched into the lines around her eyes. She stared at me, her face pale with shock, as if she was seeing a phantom. Then her eyes filled with tears, and she threw her arms around me, holding on so tightly I could barely breathe. "Leo," she sobbed into my shoulder. "I knew it. I knew you were out there." We didn't have much time for a reunion. "How is she?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "She's resting. In her room," Sarah whispered, pulling me inside. "The news from the hospital this morning. She thinks it's a miracle. She has more hope than I've seen in months." The house smelled the same, a mixture of my mother's lavender potpourri and something else, something stale and oppressive. As we walked towards the master bedroom, I saw it. On the hallway table, right where every guest would see it, was a framed copy of my Forbes magazine cover. My father had put it there, a trophy, a testament to his long-lost lottery ticket. My mother was asleep when we entered her room. The sight of her stole the air from my lungs. She was so frail, a pale shadow of the vibrant woman I remembered, lost in a sea of pillows and blankets. The chemotherapy had taken her hair, and a soft cap covered her head. The picture Sarah had told me about was on her nightstand, right next to a glass of water. Me, at 10 years old, grinning proudly, my face full of a future I couldn't imagine. An IV stand was beside her bed, a silent, ominous companion. This was real. This was the cost of my father's sins and my own silence. I knelt by her bed, my hand trembling as I reached out to touch hers. Her skin was cool, papery. At my touch, her eyelids fluttered open. She blinked, her gaze unfocused at first. Then her eyes locked on mine. Confusion, then disbelief, then a wave of pure, unadulterated recognition washed over her face. Her breath hitched. "Leo." Her voice was a fragile whisper, a sound I hadn't heard in 9 years. "My boy, it is you. I knew it." Tears streamed down her face and down mine. I couldn't speak. I just held her hand, the years of anger and distance melting away in the warmth of her gaze. There was no judgment, no blame, just a mother's love, fierce and unconditional. We talked for what felt like an eternity. I told her I was okay, that I was safe. I didn't tell her everything, not about my father's crimes, not about the storm that was about to break. I just let her know I was here. She held my hand, her grip surprisingly strong, and told me she never gave up hope. "A mother knows," she whispered, her eyes shining. "A mother always knows." Suddenly, Sarah appeared at the door, her face ashen. "He's coming back," she mouthed, holding up her phone. I checked the GPS tracker. His car was only 10 minutes away. He must have realized something was wrong, that I wasn't going to show. He was coming back, and he was coming back angry. "You have to go," Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with panic. "He can't find you here, not like this. He'll explode." My mother's grip on my hand tightened. "No," she said, her voice finding a new strength. "Don't go. Don't you dare run again, Leo. Not this time. Stay, face him." I looked from my terrified sister to my resolute mother, and I knew she was right. Running was what Leo Vance did. Alex Sterling didn't run. He owned the room. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, my voice steady and cold. I stood up and turned to Sarah. "It's time. Call them." Sarah nodded, her hands shaking as she dialed the number I had given her. A few moments later, I heard them. The distant, unmistakable wail of sirens, growing closer and closer. My father's car was just pulling into the driveway as the first police cruiser, lights flashing, screeched to a halt right behind him, blocking him in. The wail of the sirens was the sound of a 9-year dam breaking. From the bedroom window, I had a perfect view of the street. My father, Robert Vance, stepped out of his car, his face a mask of confusion and irritation. He probably thought it was a traffic stop, a minor inconvenience in his grand day of reeling in his billionaire son. He smoothed his tie, a gesture of authority that had always preceded a lecture, and turned to face the officer getting out of the first cruiser. Then a second police car pulled up, and a third. His confident posture faltered. This wasn't a traffic stop. Sarah stood beside me, her hand over her mouth, her knuckles white. My mother, propped up against her pillows, watched the scene unfold with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. A quiet, steely resolve. The years of passive acceptance were gone, burned away by illness and a mother's fierce, rekindled hope. "What is this?" My father's voice boomed, loud enough to hear through the closed window. "There must be some mistake." A detective in a plain suit, a man whose face I recognized from the file my PI had sent me. Detective Miller, lead on cold cases, stepped forward, holding a piece of paper. "Robert Vance?" he asked, his voice calm and carrying. "We have a warrant for your arrest." "Arrest?" My father laughed, a harsh, incredulous bark. "For what? An unpaid parking ticket?" Detective Miller didn't smile. "For involuntary manslaughter and felony fraud in connection with the 2017 collapse of the North Gate parking structure." The color drained from my father's face. The swagger, the arrogance, the entire carefully constructed facade of the powerful patriarch crumbled into dust right there on the cracked pavement of his own driveway. His eyes darted around wildly, from the cops to the house, as if searching for an escape route, a lie that could get him out of this. And then, his eyes found the window. He saw me. For a split second, our gazes locked across the overgrown lawn. In his eyes, I saw it all. The shock, the confusion, the dawning, horrific realization that this was not a coincidence. This was my doing. He didn't see the ghost of his long-lost son. He saw the architect of his ruin. He opened his mouth, my name forming on his lips, a curse or a plea, I'll never know which. The officers were on him then, turning him around, cuffing his hands behind his back with a professional, indifferent efficiency. "You have the right to remain silent," the officer droned on. The Miranda writes a surreal soundtrack to the complete implosion of my father's world. They guided him into the back of a cruiser. He didn't struggle. He looked small, old, and utterly defeated. As the car pulled away, I met my mother's gaze in the reflection of the window. There were fresh tears in her eyes, but they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of release. The hours that followed were a whirlwind. Sarah handled the neighbors who had gathered on their lawns, drawn by the spectacle. She told them there had been a misunderstanding with the business, a simple, vague explanation to quell the gossip. Inside the house, a fragile peace settled. The oppressive weight of my father's presence, a force that had dominated this house for my entire life, was gone. It was like the air pressure had changed. My mother, Elena, seemed to grow stronger by the minute. With the source of her stress and fear physically removed, it was as if her body could finally focus all its energy on healing. We sat together, and for the first time, we truly talked. I told her about the early years, the struggle, the loneliness. I told her about the breakthroughs, the moments of triumph. I told her about Alex Sterling, the armor I had built around the fragile heart of Leo Vance. She listened, her hand holding mine, and she told me her side of the story. She told me how she had fought him about the memorial, how she had refused to declare me dead in her heart. "He wanted to close the book on you, Leo," she said, her voice filled with a quiet fire. "He said it was for my own good, to help me move on. But I knew. He wanted to erase his disappointment. But you were never a disappointment to me. Never." Later that evening, my brother Mark arrived. Sarah must have called him. He burst through the door, his face flushed with anger and confusion. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded, his eyes finding me. "The police arrested Dad. The news is saying the company is under investigation. They're saying you're alive." He stared at me, his childhood rival, the brother he had been conditioned to look down upon. I was supposed to be a tragic cautionary tale. Instead, I was standing in his mother's bedroom, the orchestrator of his father's downfall. "It's true," I said simply. "All of it." "How could you?" he spat, his voice trembling with rage. "You come back after 9 years and you do this? You destroy our family? You destroy his life?" "His life?" I countered, my own anger rising cold and precise. "He destroyed his own life, Mark. He let a man die. He lied to our mother. He was going to use her illness to steal my money after leaving me for dead. Is that the family you're so desperate to protect?" "He's our father," Mark yelled. "He stopped being my father the day he told me I was a burden he was tired of looking at," I shot back. "I just finalized the divorce." Sarah stepped between us. "Mark, stop. You don't know everything." "I know he raised us. He put a roof over our heads." "And what was the price of that roof, Mark?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. "Your blind obedience? My exile? Mom's silent suffering? His reputation was the only thing he ever truly loved, and he sacrificed all of us to it. I'm just sending him the bill." Mark stared at me, his loyalties warring on his face. He had been the good son, the heir apparent, but the kingdom was gone, the king dethroned. He was adrift. Without another word, he turned and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. The next few weeks were a blur of legal battles and medical appointments. My lawyers, a phalanx of pinstriped sharks, descended on the town. They ensured my father was denied bail, citing the overwhelming evidence and his newfound connection to a son with billions of dollars, making him a significant flight risk. They filed civil suits on behalf of my mother and sister, moving to seize any and all remaining personal assets he had, ensuring they would be financially secure and independent from him forever. Meanwhile, I focused on my mother. The anonymous trust I'd set up worked flawlessly. She was moved to the best cancer treatment center in the country, a place of healing and hope. I went with her, leaving the shell of my childhood home behind for good. I worked remotely from her hospital suite, running my company while she underwent her treatments. The color returned to her cheeks. She started to laugh again. We were rebuilding piece by piece what my father had tried to shatter. One afternoon, about a month after my return, I was sitting by her bed, reading to her, when my lead attorney called. I stepped into the hallway to take it. "Alex," he said, his voice grim, "we have a problem. Your father is refusing any plea deal. He's pleading not guilty to all charges. His public defender is claiming he's the victim here." I scoffed. "A victim of what? His own criminal negligence?" "A victim of you," the lawyer replied. "They're building a narrative. They're going to paint you as a vindictive, estranged son who fabricated evidence and used his immense wealth and power to frame his own father as revenge. They're going to put your entire past on trial." I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't just about the facts anymore. It was about story. And my father, even from a jail cell, was trying to write the final chapter. "That's not the problem, though," my lawyer continued, his voice lowering. "The problem is Mark. He just contacted the district attorney's office. He's going to testify for the defense. He's going to be his father's star witness." The news that Mark would testify for the defense hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't a strategic blow. My case was built on a mountain of irrefutable evidence, and a disgruntled brother's testimony would be a minor inconvenience. It was a personal one. It was the final, definitive proof that the chasm between us was too wide to ever be bridged. He had chosen his side. He had chosen the fallen king over the brother he thought was dead. In his eyes, I wasn't family. I was the enemy who had torched his inheritance and his identity as the golden son. "Let him," I said to my lawyer, my voice colder than I felt. Let him get on that stand and perjure himself for a man who would have sacrificed him just as easily as he sacrificed me. Let the world see what kind of family Robert Vance built. In the months leading up to the trial, I compartmentalized. During the day, I was Alex Sterling, the CEO. I ran my company with ruthless efficiency from a suite of offices I'd leased near the hospital. I launched 2 new products, acquired a smaller rival, and watched my company's valuation soar. It was my armor, a world of logic and control where I was untouchable. In the evenings, I was Leo, the sun. I sat with my mother as she endured the grueling immunotherapy. We watched old movies, played cards, and talked for hours, filling in the 9-year blank space between us. Her hair started to grow back, a soft silver down. The light returned to her eyes. She was fighting, and she was winning. Sarah was my bridge between those 2 worlds. She moved into a new apartment I'd bought for her and my mother, a place free of the ghosts of our old house. She managed my mother's care, acting as the fierce protector she'd never had the chance to be before. She was also my source of intel. Mark, she told me, had become our father's proxy on the outside. He visited him in jail every week, taking instructions, meeting with the beleaguered public defender. He was clinging to the wreckage, trying to piece together the life he was promised from the ashes of my return. He'd even tried to start a Justice for Robert Vance page online. It got 12 followers. The trial began on a crisp autumn day. The local courthouse was a media circus. Billionaire ghost son versus the father he had jailed. The headlines were sensational, but the reality was a grim, fluorescent-lit affair. My mother, now in remission and looking stronger every day, insisted on being there. She and Sarah sat in the front row, a silent, united front. I sat with my legal team, a fortress of tailored suits and expensive briefcases. My father was led in, wearing an ill-fitting suit, the swagger replaced by a sallow-faced resentment. He wouldn't look at me, but I could feel the heat of his hatred from across the room. The prosecution laid out its case with brutal efficiency. They presented the forged inspection reports, the financial documents proving motive, the expert testimony on the structural collapse. They presented the foreman's affidavit. It was a methodical, undeniable dismantling of a man's life. Then it was the defense's turn. Their strategy was exactly what my lawyer had predicted. They didn't try to refute the evidence. They tried to refute me. They painted a picture of Leo Vance as a troubled, resentful son, an outcast who ran away from home and harbored a deep-seated grudge. Alex Sterling, they argued, was just Leo Vance with a billion-dollar weapon. Finally, they called their star witness. The defense calls Mark Vance to the stand. Mark walked to the witness box, his jaw set. He looked older, worn down by a loyalty he couldn't afford. He avoided looking at us, his gaze fixed on the defense attorney. He swore his oath, and the performance began. He spoke of our father as a pillar of the community, a strict but loving man who was devastated by the loss of his youngest son. He painted me as lazy, ungrateful, a boy who lived in a fantasy world of computers and rejected the family's legacy. "Isn't it true, Mr. Vance," the defense attorney asked, "that your brother Leo swore he would get revenge on your father for not funding his ridiculous app ideas?" "Yes," Mark said, his voice firm. "He was always jealous of my relationship with Dad. He said one day he'd make Dad pay. It was a complete fabrication, a disgusting twist of the truth. I felt my mother flinch beside me. I remained motionless, my face a mask of stone. Let him lie. Every word was just another shovel full of dirt on our father's grave." The prosecution began their cross-examination. Our lead prosecutor, a sharp, relentless woman named Dana Chavez, approached the stand. "Mr. Vance," she began, her voice soft, "you say you were close to your father. Were you aware of the company's financial state before his arrest?" I knew we'd had a tough year," Mark stammered. "A tough year." Chavez raised an eyebrow. Were you aware of the bankruptcy filing, the second and third mortgages on your family home, the massive debts? Dad handled the finances, Mark said, his voice smaller. He protected us from that. Or he hid it from you, Chavez countered. She projected a document onto the screen. This is an email from your father to his accountant, dated 1 week before the garage collapse. In it, he says, and I quote, "The Northgate project has to pass inspection, no matter what. If it doesn't, we lose everything." Were you aware of this, Mr. Vance? Mark paled. No. So your father, the man who you claim was an open book, was in fact hiding catastrophic financial ruin from you, his trusted heir? He was under a lot of pressure, Mark insisted. Pressure enough to falsify safety reports and risk lives? Chavez pressed. Is that the kind of man your father is? Mark was floundering, his carefully rehearsed narrative falling apart under the weight of actual facts. He shot a desperate look at our father, who could only watch, impotent and furious. And then Chavez moved in for the kill. Mr. Vance, let's talk about your brother. You've painted him as vindictive. Tell me, when was the last time you saw your brother before his disappearance? Mark hesitated. I don't know. A few days before he went hiking. And what was your last conversation about? It was nothing. An argument. Stupid family stuff. Wasn't it, in fact, an argument about a $1,000 investment Leo had just received for his first startup? Chavez asked, her eyes boring into him. An investment your father ridiculed, calling your brother a failure and a burden? Mark's face went rigid. I don't remember the specifics. Let me refresh your memory, Chavez said, pulling out a small old MP3 player and handing it to the bailiff. The prosecution would like to enter this into evidence. The defense attorney shot up. Objection, where did this come from? It was mailed to my office anonymously last week, Chavez replied smoothly. Let's have a listen, shall we? A crackling, tinny audio filled the courtroom. It was my voice, young and full of hope, arguing with my father, and then my father's voice, dripping with contempt. $1,000. You're throwing your life away for a pipe dream. And then the final, fatal words. You're a disappointment, and frankly, I'm tired of looking at you. But the recording didn't stop there. There was another voice, Mark's voice, younger, smugger. Just give it up, Leo. You'll never be him. Just accept it. And then a final chilling sound, my father laughing. See, even your brother gets it. The courtroom was silent. Mark was ashen, his betrayal laid bare for everyone to hear. He had not only stood by, he had participated. I hadn't sent the recording. I didn't even know it existed. I glanced at Sarah. She stared straight ahead, a tiny cryptic smile on her face. She had found it, the last piece of the puzzle. My father was convicted on all counts. He was sentenced to 20 years to life. A month later, my mother, Sarah, and I were at her new apartment, celebrating her official all clear from her doctors. We were a new family, forged in fire. As we were laughing, my phone buzzed. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize. I know what you did. You think you've won. You took everything from me, my father, my future. This isn't over. I'm going to get it all back. I'm going to take everything from you, just like you did to us. And I'm going to start with your company. It was from Mark. It wasn't a threat. It was a declaration of war. Mark's text message was pathetic, the last gasp of a dethroned prince. I'm going to start with your company. I almost laughed. Him? The guy who couldn't even manage his own life, who had willingly tethered himself to the anchor of our father's lies, was going to take on my $3 billion empire? It was like a flea, threatening to bring down a skyscraper. I showed the message to Sarah. She read it, sighed, and shook her head. He's lost, Leo. He has nothing left but Dad's anger. That's all he is now. My mother, overhearing us, placed a gentle hand on my arm. "Let it go, son," she said, her voice soft but firm. "He's not your battle to fight anymore. We have a life to live. Let's live it." She was right. For the first time in 9 years, the fire of vengeance that had fueled me was gone, replaced by the quiet warmth of having my family back, my real family. The anger, the spite, the need to prove myself, it had all been exercised in that courtroom. Alex Sterling had served his purpose. He had built the weapons and the fortress I needed to save Leo Vance. Now it was time for them to become one person. I deleted Mark's message and blocked the number. I threw myself into my mother's recovery and into reconnecting with Sarah. We spent the next year making up for lost time. We took my mother on a trip to Italy, something she'd always dreamed of. We watched her stand in the middle of a Tuscan vineyard, her face turned to the sun, a picture of pure, unadulterated joy. I watched Sarah, free from the weight of our family's toxicity, start taking night classes in graphic design, rediscovering a passion she'd long since buried. I found a surprising peace in the quiet moments, cooking dinner with them, listening to their stories, simply being present. My company continued to thrive, but my relationship with it changed. It was no longer a weapon or a shield, it was a tool. I established the Elena Vance Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to funding medical care for families battling cancer who couldn't afford it. I put my mother and Sarah on the board. We started with a $100 million endowment. It was the best money I ever spent. The work gave them a purpose, and it gave my wealth a meaning beyond a number on a magazine cover. As for Mark, I heard whispers. He'd tried to rally support for an appeal for our father, but no one was interested. He was a pariah in the town that had once revered the Vance name. He tried to get a job in construction, but the stink of our father's scandal followed him everywhere. He was a man living in the shadow of a ghost and a convict. He was, in a word, irrelevant. I truly put him out of my mind. About 2 years after the trial, I was in my office. A new one, smaller, with more windows and fewer intimidating monitors, when my head of security buzzed me. "Mr. Sterling, there's a gentleman here to see you, a Mr. Mark Vance. He doesn't have an appointment." My first instinct was to say no, to have him thrown out, but curiosity got the better of me. What could he possibly want? "Send him in," I said, leaning back in my chair. The man who walked into my office was a stranger. The anger and defiance were gone, replaced by a hollowed-out exhaustion. He was thin, his suit was cheap, and his eyes were haunted. He looked defeated. He stood awkwardly in the middle of the room, not meeting my gaze. "What do you want, Mark?" I asked, my voice neutral. He finally looked at me, and what I saw wasn't hatred, but a desperate, pathetic shame. "I need a job," he said, the words barely a whisper. I stared at him, stunned into silence. Of all the things I had expected, this was not one of them. "You're joking," I said. "I'm not," he said, his voice cracking. "I've lost everything. The house is gone. I'm broke. No one will hire me. You're the only person I have left to ask." This was his grand plan? His declaration of war? To come groveling for a job? The sheer irony was staggering. He had stood in a courtroom and lied for our father, tried to destroy my credibility, and now he was here, begging for a lifeline. "Why should I help you, Mark?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "You chose him, you stood by him, you lied for him." "I know," he said, his eyes finally filling with tears. "I was a fool. I visited him in prison last week, for the last time. All he talked about was the appeal, about how I was going to get him out, how we would rebuild. He didn't ask me how I was. He didn't care that I was losing everything. It was always about him. It was always just about him. You were right." He finally broke, sinking into the chair opposite my desk and burying his face in his hands. "You were right about everything, Leo, and I'm so sorry." I looked at my brother, truly looked at him for the first time in over a decade. I didn't see the smug rival or the bitter enemy. I saw a man who had been just as much a victim of our father's manipulation as I had been, just in a different way. I was the disappointment he'd discarded. Mark was the golden child he'd suffocated, molding him into a pale imitation of himself, never allowing him to become his own man. We were two sides of the same toxic coin, and in that moment, I felt not anger, not triumph, but a profound sense of pity. Holding on to my grudge against him would be like letting our father continue to have a foothold in my life, a small piece of territory I refused to cede. My mother's words echoed in my mind. Let it go. I can't give you a job here, Mark, I said finally. He flinched, expecting the final blow. My company is built on a certain kind of innovation, and frankly, it's not your world. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. But the foundation, the Elena Vance Foundation, is overseeing the construction of a new, state-of-the-art hospice care facility. We need a project manager, someone who knows construction, who knows how to read blueprints and manage crews, someone who can make sure it gets built right. No cut corners. He looked up, his face etched with disbelief. You'd trust me with that? No, I said honestly, but Mom would, and it's her name on the building. You won't be working for me. You'll be working for her. You'll report to Sarah. The pay is average, the work is hard, but it's honest. It's a chance to build something that helps people instead of something that hurts them. It's a chance to build your own name, not just be his. Tears streamed down his face, silent and heavy. He just nodded, unable to speak. It wasn't a perfect ending. There was no tearful reunion, no immediate forgiveness. The relationship between us would forever be scarred. But it was a beginning. It was a chance for him to atone, not with words, but with deeds. He took the job. He worked harder than I'd ever seen him work. He was good at it. He built that hospice like he was building his own salvation brick by brick. And slowly, painstakingly, he began to build a bridge back to a family he had almost lost for good. My war was over. I hadn't just won. I had created a peace my father had never known how to build. And in the end, that was a legacy far greater than any billion-dollar company.